Welcome back. Now, women's fertility has over time evolved from being a personal matter to a communal one to even political. Whether it is the issue of abortion, the forced sterilization of women living with HIV, IVF, contraceptives, or tubal ligation, a woman's womb and what happens with it and in it will continue to stir debate. Well, tonight, we take a look at the current state of reproductive rights of women in this country, a week after the High Court ruling on an abortion case. But first, let's listen in to the harrowing experience of a rape survivor and her eventual decision to have an abortion. And we must put this disclaimer that parts of her story may be a bit distressing for some of our younger viewers.
Back then, nikiwa 15 years, nilikuwa na stay mimi na anko wangu na watoi wetu. So hapo then mamangu hakuwa na stay kwa nyumba, alikuwa na kaa kwa uko job. So tulikuwa na anko wetu, mimi ndio nilikuwa napika daily, tunalala, ikaenda hivyo. So one day anko wangu akanishika na nguvu, then akanirape na akatoroka. So nikakaa siku notice kama niko na mimba, ikakaa. Then after some times nikakuja ku notice niko na mimba. Niliogopa juu, nilistuka juu sikuwa nime have sex na mtu but that time. So nikaogopa ndambia nani. Mamangu ni mtu anakanga job na ni mtu mkali, huwezi mwambie anything. So ikakaa nikabidi saa juu naona inazidi kugrow. Nikaamua kuambia friend. So rafiki yangu akaniambia kuna method tunaweza tumia. Nikamuuliza gani, akaniambia tuende OC. Kwenda OC ilikuwa expensive. 3 kuna pale tuliambiwa 4. So tukaona hiyo siwezi afford that time. So akaniambia tutatumia ujanja ingine. Tukabuy omo na juice. Then tukamix kwa glass moja. Then nikakunywa. After kukunywa nikalala tu. Juu nilikuwa nasikia ile after kukunywa nikaanza kusikia pain. Uchungu. Then after sometimes nikaanza kubleed. So ile kubleed na watu wako kwa nyumba, nikaamua kulala kwa kitanda. So ile kulala, unajua mimi yule mtu mwenye amezoanga kutoka nje kuongea na majirani. So wase wanashangaa, mbona leo Mary atoki nje? So majirani wakakam, kuna madhali kam, alikuwa neighbor akakam. So kufungua kapata na bleed. Nilikuwa kwa bleed na bleed mingi sana. Juu ile time nimetoa ball ikaanza kubleed. So wase wakakaa majirani nini, wakaita watu, wakanitoa nje, wakinipiga. Ikaanza kutoka damu zile sijaiona kubwa. Yaani ilikuwa uchungu sana ikitoka. The moment ilitoka nilifeel ni kama nakufa cause nimeona kitu sijaiona. Then wase wako na mimi nyuma, makelele, niko na uchungu. Ni kama leo siku yangu ya mwisho. Uchungu nilikuwa nasikia imetoka kwa barabara. Unajua niliforce baka kuibeba niende nayo. Juu huwezi acha ukipigwa ukienda nayo. So hiyo time ilibidi tukifika kwa chief ni inform mamangu aju. So ilibidi mamangu alikam akakuja kwa chief. Ikakuwa maneno, unajua tu ukienda kwa chief lazima utatoa kitu nini ndio utoke. Juu kitu tumefanya si kitu poa. So mamangu ilibidi atoe 10k kwa chief ndio mimi nitoke. Na bado hata sikuachwa hivyo still. Bado niliwekwa ndakuwa nafagia kwa chief every week hivyo baka siku yenye kesi ilisaulika. Na feel vibaya sana cause mimi saa hii kuna sinye tumbo yangu wewe inavura kama mwenye ako na ball, sina ball. Mimi monthly period yenye wase wanaona mimi wasioni, inakaa nikiona maybe ni kidogo hivi kwa panty then ni hivyo imeisha. So imekuwa ikinisumbua sana. Mtu anadhani kwani uko na mimba, but sina, ni tumbo inavura then inarudi tu peke yake normal. Wange legalize to abortion ni kwa ni kitu open. Unajua si wase wote tunapata msee ameripwa na babake msee ameripwa na brother yake na amepata ball na bado ni myang, unajua? Na mtu myang uwezi niambia atapata 3,000 3,400 kwenda kutoa ball. But ingekuwa amekanga mtu age below niseme 10 to 15 maybe ukirepo upate ball, kuna place unaweza enda na assess abortion free. Inaweza help sana. Juu si kila mtu anashika mimba kama anataka. Si watu wote.
Extremely difficult to listen to, and unfortunately it's a story that's replicated around informal settlements across this country. Many young women finding themselves in very precarious situations and having to choose abortion as an option to deal with the predicament they find themselves in. Let me introduce my guests very quickly. From my far right, we have Anne Kyoko. She's the campaigns manager for Africa at Citizen Go. Next to her is Tina Alai, the independent human rights and constitutional law lawyer and head of the Physicians for Human Rights here in Kenya. Thank you so much for coming. And to my left, we have Evelyn Opondo. She is a senior regional director for Africa at the Center for Reproductive Rights, the group that also has been offering support to the likes of Mary. That is a pseudonym, that is not her real name. Next to her is Dr. Wahome Ngare, who is a gynecologist and obstetrician. And last but not least, we have Regina Wabuko, who is a social media strategist, but is actually here to share her story on tubal ligation. Thank you all for joining me. Let me begin with you, Tina. The reason why we're here is because of a ruling last week by the High Court that essentially gave rape survivors the right to procure an abortion. Many seeing this as a widening of reproductive rights in this country. Just kind of take us through what this ruling actually means.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on this show. Let's begin with the background to this litigation. In 2010, as Kenyans, we promulgated a constitution that provides in Article 26(4) that abortion is not permitted unless, in the opinion of a trained health professional, there is need for emergency treatment or the life or health of an expectant woman is in danger, or if permitted by any other law in our country. Unfortunately, what has been happening since 2010 is the continuation of a situation that subsists as though Article 26(4) was not passed. What do we mean by this? A situation where abortion is prohibited under all circumstances, even when the life or health of a mother is in danger, even when survivors, such as the one we just witnessed, of sexual violence are forced to carry pregnancies that result from rape, even where trained health professionals determine that it is required. And more specifically, by the time that Physicians for Human Rights, in support of the petitioners in this case that I will just mention shortly, moved to court, the Ministry of Health, through the Director of Medical Services, had withdrawn standards and guidelines that were required to support the provision of training, to promote standards and guidelines for health professionals to understand under what circumstances can you specifically consider the life, the health of an expectant woman to be in danger, and what do you do under those circumstances? But those standards and guidelines did not only speak to termination of pregnancy, they included a number of other important things. First, they included prevention of unwanted pregnancies. What should the Ministry of Health do to prevent those unwanted pregnancies? And it speaks to a myriad of issues, including socioeconomic factors, provision of education to young girls and women, provision of contraceptives cohesively. Right. And then secondly moves on to then what do you do to manage those unwanted pregnancies when it happens? And this is where termination of pregnancies come in, particularly with regard to how the Constitution has required it. And thirdly, it spoke to provision of post-abortion care. And these then are the guidelines that the Director of Medical Services withdrew in 2012 under the guise, we call it a guise because the court has subsequently found this to have been a guise that not all stakeholders had been consulted, and particularly church-based stakeholders.
Right.
And for that reason, found it necessary to withdraw and then open up the space for further consultations. Unfortunately, as we speak, and even by the time of filing this petition, the Ministry of Health had not put in place any other standards and guidelines to guide health professionals. Secondly, the Director of Medical Services, subsequent to the withdrawal of the guidelines, issued a letter indicating to all health professionals across the country, faith-based, public hospitals, wherever they were, that nobody was permitted to attend training on safe abortion. Secondly, the Director of Medical Services withdrew the use of Medabon. Medabon is a medicine, and the gynecologist will be able to speak to this better, but it's medicine that is used, it's a combination of mifepristone and misoprostol, which are put together to support medical abortion in instances when it is safe to do so, when the term of the pregnancy is not far gone, that then requires surgical interventions. Director of Medical Services withdrew that as well. And thirdly, he issued a directive stating that should any health professional be found attending training or using Medabon, they would be subject to criminal and disciplinary proceedings. In a nutshell, sending a chilling effect to every health professional who's required under the Constitution to determine whether a woman or girl would have access to safe abortion services when their life or health is in danger. Now, this was the background.
Yeah.
Tied to this, a young girl by the name JMM, 14 years old, sexually defiled by an older man, falls pregnant around about the same time when the guidelines are withdrawn. Like many other girls across this country, she lacks access to first information on what do you do when you fall pregnant? What if you get pregnant? Where do you go? And subject to the advice of her friend, her roommate, her relative, she goes to seek unsafe abortion from a quack, which ends up in kidney failure. Cutting the long story short, eventually, when we were still in the proceedings, JMM passed on as a consequence of the unsafe abortion that she experienced, resulting in dire physical, psychological, medical complications that then resulted in her death. Now, the petitioners in this case were 4 parties. The Federation of Women Lawyers, FIDA, Kenya, supporting JMM through her mother, who appeared as the petitioner in this case, PKM, together with 2 community activists who had experienced and witnessed similar consequences faced by many women and girls in their communities, supported by several interested parties, including Physicians for Human Rights, whom I worked for at the time, Article 19, speaking on access to information. Several amicus also filed interventions, Women's Link Worldwide, a number of others, National Gender and Equality Commission, Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, as well as other interested parties, mainly faith-based institutions, and I'm sure Anne will be able to speak to that as well. Now, what did the court determine?
And
several
quickly, of course, because of time.
Important things.
Yes.
First, the court affirmed without hesitation that Article 26(4) permits access to safe abortion to women and girls when, in the opinion of a trained health professional, their life or health could be in danger. Meaning, it is not true to state that abortion is illegal under all circumstances in this country. When the life or health of a woman is in danger, it is permitted under one specific circumstance, when a trained health professional makes that determination. Not myself, not yourself, not the church, not the Director of Medical Services, but a trained health professional. And most importantly, it determined that survivors of sexual violence fall within this category of effect to their health, and not just physical health, but also psychological health and their social well-being when a trained health professional so determines. Meaning women and girls should be able to access these services across the country through trained health professionals that are not just medical doctors, but also nurses, midwives, and clinical officers.
So it opens up the way in which, I mean, a very long introduction, but one that's necessary, at least to kind of give basis to why we're discussing this in the first place. And you've been very vocal against this ruling and also been open about your stance as being pro-life. What did you make of the ruling last week?
Yes, I'm pro-life and pro-woman, and on 12th of June, it was on a Wednesday, I actually stood through the reading of the ruling, and I listened to the whole ruling and made out a few issues. First, the court reaffirmed what the Kenyan Constitution of 2010 states, that abortion is illegal in the country. Right. Everyone has a right to life from conception. And also, it was about a young girl who had a very worse experience in this country of rape, and it seems the first person who she met guided her to a solution of abortion, of killing her own baby. And in the process, she was exposed to inexperienced hands, and it was very unfortunate that she lost her life, and also the life of the preborn baby was also lost. And while listening to this ruling, I have a problem with ruling, because first it opens a Pandora's box. It wants to offer every other medical doctor, nurse, midwife a right to conduct abortions. And we have seen recently, in November last year, you saw that we stopped some clinics here in this country, like Mary Stops. They were advertising abortion in the streets. So they're opening a Pandora's box. They're opening a leeway for such kind of doctors in this country to offer abortion in every other medical clinic as a solution to abortions. And I think there are better solutions to abortion.
So you feel they'll go beyond rape survivors?
You're seeing it yourself. We stopped Mary Stops. They were advertising abortions in this country like you would advertise a sweet, like you would advertise a candy. And they had to be stopped by the medical board because abortion is illegal in the country. There's no law in this country that allows abortion. The country reserved Article 14 of Maputo Protocol. Look at the Penal Code. Look at every other law. Even the parliamentarians, there's no law that has been placed in this country that allows explicitly the murder of preborn babies. So this ruling was opening a Pandora's box for such every other doctor, clinical officer, midwives, nurses, and even if today you saw a nurse trying to offer an abortion to a young girl. It's not about solving solutions for these extreme cases. It's about opening a Pandora's box for killing preborn babies.
So you're okay with the extreme cases being taken care of when it comes to abortion as an option?
Yes, but we must look at it in a manner of solving, offering a solution for both the mother and also the preborn baby. Because like when I was coming here, I was reading a story of a woman called Mother. She has done 7 abortions, and she's regretting it. Every other time she's having nightmares, she has suicidal thoughts, psychological issues. Abortion should be seen also as it hurts women. Abortion hurts women. It really can kill women. Even the best of the clinics in this country, even in the United States, if you see IPPF, the leading abortion corporation in this world, women have gotten in there and they have died even in the best of the facilities. So when you're recommending an abortion, you are first exposing that woman to death. Number 2, to losing their own uterus. You have seen the consequences of abortion. There are so many of them. So having this ruling on 12th of June being read and seeing the judges trying to think that they're offering solutions to these kind of cases in the country, it made me think that it's a really unfortunate case. And we must see abortion as it is, a political correctness agenda, as an agenda that has been pushed by so many people. Even if you look at this document, who are the people who drafted these abortion guidelines? If you look at the index, IPAS, who are IPAS? And
let me bring in Evelyn there just to kind of respond, because do you feel, Evelyn, that this ruling will be abused, as Anne has put it, by those who are seeking abortions maybe as a form of contraception and not because they've been caused to be pregnant because of a crisis that happened to them?
No, I do not feel that this decision will be abused. First of all, I think it's really unfortunate that we keep throwing in names of organizations that are not represented here and cannot give their side of the story. And secondly, I think it's critical that we start from the Constitution. The Constitution itself talks of a trained health professional. This is not a making of the 5-judge bench. And if you look at the Committee of Experts report, they explain why they settled on trained health professionals, because even at that time, there were groups that were pushing that these services only be provided by doctors. But the Committee of Experts looked at this and said, you know what, this is a service that would be needed by all kinds of women, and medical providers are not available throughout the country. And therefore, you cannot say that a service that's needed by all women is restricted only to medical doctors. And therefore, they settled on a trained health professional. And this is exactly what the court interpreted. They did not put in anything new. And it is not the first time. Even the Health Act speaks about a trained health professional and provides for who these are. Right. And these are doctors, they are also clinical officers, they are midwives, they are nurses. Yeah. And that's looking at our reality. You cannot have a service that can only be provided by a small number of professionals that are not geographically available or affordable to everybody. And I do not think, I mean, I have heard since this decision was issued, there's been these fears from certain quarters that women will misuse this. Indeed, I don't see why we should be fearing this. This is the role of the Kenya Medical Practitioners and Dentists Board. They are the regulatory body over health. And like any other health service, if anybody is going beyond the law, right, they can crack the whip. This is what they do in all other healthcare services that are provided throughout the country. And so I don't see why abortion in particular should be, held at a different, we should have a different requirement for abortion.
Well, perhaps because of the moral and ethical concerns attached to it is the reason why people feel, well, this could be taken in a different direction. Hence a lot of pushback. But
the Constitution is very clear. It says when the health or the life of the mother is in danger, or in case of emergency, or if provided by any other law. Right. And the court has interpreted that to also mean rape cases. And so the law, unlike other health services, the law has gone to great length to explain under what circumstances abortion can be provided. And so it's a health issue, really. I don't see why we should be fearing. Why don't we fear when it's other health matters? For example, when somebody has a cholera, we will not say, oh, you did not wash your hands, you ate dirty food, or you were not vaccinated. We will give them, 7 women die of abortion every single day.
And this largely is because of an issue of unsafe abortions as well that this ruling is responding to. Yes. But before we get to that, Dr. Ngare, just to kind of have a better understanding of the different ways that people can go about an abortion, and depending on, I guess, the stages of pregnancy, just so people understand what it is from a medical perspective that we're dealing with.
Thank you very much, Victoria. I am actually very sad that we are going through this discussion without addressing the main issue. The young lady who has just spoken, and JMM, actually suffered rape. They were violently abused, and this country is not addressing that concern. Now, if you imagine that only about 5% of women get pregnant after rape, then you're saying there are a lot more women who are being raped than who are not pregnant, who will not benefit from the solution that we are offering. In other words, the problem here is not the pregnancy. The problem here is rape, and we are not addressing rape. The other thing that is very clear is that that young lady went to, actually is a pharmacy. Yeah. And that's where they started trying to induce the abortion. She was 7.5 months pregnant by the time they were doing this. And there is an abortionist in that village who up to today is there, and probably the matter has not been addressed. How many other women are going to suffer under his hands? So the concern here for me is really that there are 2 things we need to tell the public. The survivor of rape is the victim here, and we need to educate the whole of this country that if this person is brought to the hospital within at least 72 hours, it is possible to take care of them. And it is also possible to get enough evidence to convict these people.
Right.
The minute you delay, we are not able to get evidence to convict them. That's why most rape people will get away with it. Then there are so many other things she would suffer from. She could get HIV, she could get STIs, she could get all sorts of things. So there are medical protocols that we use in hospital to be able to prevent all this, including preventing the occasions of a pregnancy.
Right.
So what we are missing as a country is when we are looking at abortion as a solution, we are failing to solve the major crisis, which is rape.
Right.
And the other thing is that once you start talking about trained health providers giving the opinion, and that's where our biggest concern was. The Constitution says the opinion of a trained health professional. And here we are talking about terminating a pregnancy.
Right.
The only level of people trained to the level where they can give an opinion about whether a pregnancy should be terminated or not in this country is medical doctors. Okay? Now you can teach a nurse, a clinical officer, and somebody else to procure an abortion. You can teach them to use Medabone. You can teach them to do the surgical one. You can actually teach the skill. But for you to get to a level where you determine, especially a psychological condition that requires termination of pregnancy,
Right.
even I would need to involve a psychiatrist. Okay, so by the time I feel this mother is actually depressed, for instance, that patient who comes raped, she's already suffering a psychological problem. It's very traumatic. Abortion actually adds on to this. She will have to deal with two psychological problems. The abortion will never reverse the rape. Okay, so I think it is good to have short fixes, but I think it is important that we look at this from a much wider perspective.
So in your view, the victim should, or survivor, should probably carry the baby to term to avoid double trauma, in your view?
What we have done, we have amongst the groups of pro-life, we have a group that is called the Protecting Life Movement, and we have what we call Kyotas, all right? Now, the Kyota is a rescue home for women in crisis pregnancies. We deal with young teenagers and people. We have one particular experience of a lady who came from Congo, a refugee, and she was pregnant, and she had been raped, and the whole village where she was living, all her relatives were killed. And when she came to us, she was very traumatized. And we talked to her, and we gave the option that if she doesn't want to keep the child, we'll support her through the pregnancy. Because she didn't want the baby, but she didn't also want to kill it. The killing is a last resort, is basically also traumatic for the mother. So she agreed to keep the pregnancy. And when she delivered the baby and we were organizing for the child to be adopted, she changed her mind.
To keep the child? To
keep the child. And we were very surprised because that's the first rape victim that we had, a rape survivor we had handled. And when we asked her why, she said it is because this is the only relative that she has left.
And I'm curious because that is one case and one that we consider isolated. Evelyn, you deal a lot with this as well. What do you find is the decision most of these women in crisis pregnancies actually make?
I think, first of all, to say that women are not homogeneous. Women think differently, they behave differently and react differently to different situations. And so you cannot say that all women will want to give to adoption, and you cannot also say that all women will refuse to give adoption if that solution, option is offered to them. I want to say that first, I agree with Dr. Ngare on the need to address rape comprehensively. And that's what we do support. We are not saying that abortion is the solution or the only option. There are other ways, including information and including accessing services before that, before the 72 hours. And also, the issue that you raised about quacks. Quacks are operating in broad daylight, and it's important that the whip is cracked on these quacks so that they stop doing this, and that services are only provided by trained health professionals. I want to say that, you know, I appreciate that they're making an effort, but even the quotas are not available throughout the country. There's need to do more, yeah. And some women will want to have an abortion, and it will affect their lives, if, you know, mentally. And the courts and even the law has provided that if a pregnancy endangers their life, then that option is there. And if you look at the standards and guidelines that were withdrawn, these standards and guidelines spoke to prevention, as Tina explained, and they also provided, you know, options such as adoption, but they also provided, you know, how you deal with a pregnancy that should be terminated. And also not discriminating and stigmatizing women who have already induced abortion and who require that health service, that when they come into a facility, that you provide them that service, that we save their lives. And not only do they not die, but also that we don't have a number of women living with lifelong disabilities that they can ill afford to treat.
I wanted to raise that issue of stigma because and I believe the group you were with was behind the billboards that had been seen around, at least for Nairobi, that were pushing for a pro-life agenda. And many saw it as also a way of stigmatizing women, as you said, Evelyn, who have, you know, chosen abortion and cannot get post-abortive care, very necessary, at least for their survival. What was your intention when you put up those billboards at that time?
Well, a good look at those billboards, they were done by the Sozo Church of God and my good friend Apostle Kathy. A good look at those billboards, they were offering a phone number where those people who have gone through abortions can go for counseling, because like I have said before, abortion really hurts women, has psychological effects and everything else. So they were offering that option of going for counseling. And basically what those billboards were doing, they were telling people, they were telling everybody, men and women, that inside a womb there's a human life. Life begins at that moment of conception, when that sperm and ovum, meet and they form a zygote, and all those stages the doctor will tell. And we must respect every other stage of human development. And they were actually telling young girls especially not to be misinformed, because there's this agenda, and we must see it as an agenda by the abortion industry to normalize the abortion issue, because the abortion industry is trying to offer abortion as a solution to crisis pregnancies, and they're not offering the other side of it, like Dr. Hames said, the quotas. And the quotas actually, the women who go there with crisis pregnancies, they always come out and they say, no, okay, I came here without wanting this baby, but at the end of the day, they want to go back with their baby, and they're embraced by the society. So these are solutions that these billboards were offering. And when you talk about a judge trying to, a 5-judge bench trying to offer some solutions or that pertains to abortion, we should take this issue back to the Mwananchi. Let's take it in a referendum, and you'll realize an overwhelming majority of Kenyans support life from conception to that of natural death. Let's just take it to the common Mwananchi and let them vote. Let's see these women that we are speaking for, that they want abortions, what they will tell about this issue. Because a survey actually just done recently, 87% of women of Kenyans actually do not support the murder of preborn babies, because abortion is actually murder, and we must see it like that from that moment of conception. And we must study the process. At 29 days, there's a heartbeat. There's heartbeat. Somebody is inside there with their own DNA, their own chromosomes, and if you do an ultrasound to that baby, you will see a baby, a very beautiful baby. And the other day I was watching Bahati's wife, who is now pregnant, enjoying the ultrasound, listening to that sound, and she was so, she was so moved. She cried because she could hear and communicate with the baby she is carrying, And
and I totally hear what you're saying, and I need to put this to Tina in terms of how we expand the space of reproductive rights when what Anne mentioned makes this situation and issue so polarizing. How do you do that? Because, and she's right, majority of Kenyans do support pro-life issues. But when you're talking about having to open up this space for women who are in crisis pregnancies or any other situation where they would not want a pregnancy, how do you open up that space where you're having to deal with that pushback?
I think the first thing to acknowledge, and this is where the largest problem is, the stigmatization. Where's the stigmatization coming from? The stigmatization is coming from the fact that we have refused to be tolerant as a society. Where does the intolerance stem from? My faith and your faith could be different. Her faith and my faith could be different. All of us seated in this place, if we were to place our moral beliefs, our religious beliefs on the table, we could have a fight until tomorrow morning. But there's one thing that's been established to put us all under a standard way of living. It's not been imposed upon us, we promulgated it. The Bill of Rights, the Constitution. None of us has a right to stigmatize a woman or girl for, first, her human dignity. Rights are not given to us by a state. They are innate. They're within us. Women and girls are not crazy. There's no human being who would want to terminate a life of a heartbeat that she feels within her. And that is what the Constitution recognized in 26(4). It starts by saying everybody has a right to life.
Right.
It proceeds to say life begins at conception, indeed, and concludes in 26(4) by stating that even though life begins at conception, even though there's a beating human being, we have decided to protect the life of an expectant woman just as we would the life of that unborn child. And so the Constitution is saying, when you, the woman who's carrying this pregnancy's life is in danger, we will protect you. When the girl who has been raped, her health, whether it's physical or psychological, is in danger, we will protect you.
Right.
Let us respect that as a society. And the billboards, the mudslinging, what it does is this. It stops women and girls like JMM from getting the courage to access a health facility and simply say, what? I feel like this pregnancy is affecting my well-being. How can you help me? In such a situation, the standards and guidelines kick in, because then a trained health professional will use their medical skills, including counseling, including provision of all measures available, adoption, and what have you.
Right.
And if in the final analysis it is their opinion that the requirement for an abortion is necessary, then they will provide it.
Okay.
But the more we continue to stigmatize, we are pushing away. But I'd just like to mention one point that's critical, which the court recognized: the inextricable link between Article 26(4) and the right to health protected in Article 43. Why is this necessary? Because the right to health then requires the state to do a number of things. And this speaks to what Dr. Ngare was rightly pointing out. The full cycle of the reproductive health of a woman or girl. Meaning, first, proactively make information available.
Right.
Information on access to services, access to contraceptives, access to health facilities. Make those facilities available and close to women and girls. Then we would have situations where we're avoiding unwanted pregnancies and contraceptives. And but for as long as it doesn't exist.
Dr. Gary, in on this one, because just to also kind of look at abortion side effects as well, and what does it do even in terms of the physical issues. We saw Mary, not her real name, sharing that she finds her stomach would swell at points in the month and then come back down, of course that being a side effect of what she had done a couple of years back. But what does it do to the body physically? So women are aware also as well.
Well, that's a very good question. We start with the definition because that's where the confusion begins. Abortion, even as written in the Constitution, is a social definition. So in medicine, we do not have abortion as a treatment. Okay, so in medicine, abortion is a diagnosis. So we are trained to treat, prevent disease. Okay, and pregnancy is not a disease. Okay, so abortion is really the terminating of a pregnancy by deliberately killing the unborn child. And the first thing we had problems with that guideline is that it talked about unsafe abortion. There were guidelines for unsafe abortion. The guidelines we need are for abortion, reducing the death from abortion. Because whether you call it safe or unsafe, the baby dies and the risks to the mother do not change, right? So first we need guidelines against abortion. And the guidelines that are there now, before these ones were brought in, about abortion, were basically to train people about the risks of abortion so that they don't go through them, and then to help prevent pregnancy, and then post-abortion care. Again, post-abortion care means the mother has already partially lost the pregnancy, is bleeding, and she needs evacuation to complete the process. That's an emergency service that in this country even nurses have been trained to do, because it is a very critical service. JMM could not be given that because her pregnancy was already 7.5 months. Okay? So when it comes to abortion, what you're supposed to do when you're doing an abortion, depending on how big it is, assume it is below 20 weeks. To do an abortion, you must open up the mouth of the cervix, or the uterus, which is called the cervix. And you do this using an instrument, a metal instrument, to widen the opening so that you can put in a suction. That suction would then pull out the contents in the uterus, including the baby. Usually tears it apart and comes out with whatever is inside there. So when you're talking about injuries, you can injure the cervix. So women who have gone through abortion sometimes have a weak cervix, and they keep losing subsequent pregnancies. But you could also perforate the uterus, because the uterus is very soft. And if you perforate the uterus, depending on what else you find inside the abdomen, then you can damage gut, you can damage the bladder, and many other things, which actually happen to JMM. The other thing that happens is that there is a risk of bleeding. Sometimes you're not able to empty everything. And a pregnancy that is normal is harder to terminate than one that has already gone wrong. Okay, so if a pregnancy, the baby is already dead and is maybe 12 weeks, it's very easy to remove. But when the baby is alive, the placenta tends to stick very hard, and therefore you can release the patient and they actually bleed. So bleeding is the other one. And right. JMM bled to a point where she went into shock, and that is what caused the kidney failure.
So it can be a further risk to the mother's health.
Yes. Now, it would increase. You see, even if you say the risk of an abortion, say the risk of damaging the uterus is 5%. But because abortion is illegal, only 100 are occurring in a year, then you'll only have 5 perforated uteruses. If you make it legal and you have 1,000 being done, then you will end up with 100 uteruses that are damaged. So what it does is that even in safe hands, you actually increase the rate of risks. But the most important one is that the mothers are always psychologically injured. They come, they look at this as a solution, but the rate of regret and suffering thereafter is such that they actually need treatment for mental concerns. And that is a fact. Whether it is done by a trained person or whether it is done in the back street, what we are saying, abortion is abortion, and we need to address it as that.
And I'll get Evelyn's rebuttal to that really quickly, but let's bring in Regina, who's been waiting patiently to share her story on tubal ligation. Another issue when it comes to reproductive rights, because you find a lot of women who are within the childbearing age who do request this procedure don't get it. And there's several reasons that they'll receive from their doctor: that they're too young, they haven't had children yet, they may change their mind, they only have one child, or perhaps are married to someone who has a high-risk job. And so for you, I guess you can tell us what was the reasoning behind your denial to get your tubes tied.
Well, I got pregnant when I was 23 and I gave birth to twins. So after that, I was done. Like, I knew I'm done. This is it, yeah. So I called my gyna and asked him, no, before I got out of hospital, I asked him if I could do it, and he was like, no, right now it's because of the trauma of the whole giving birth thing. So after a while, let's give you 1 year. So next year, time like now, come, then we'll talk about it.
Right.
So 1 year passed and I called him. I was like, yeah, my mind is still, I'm still on it. Right. I still want it done. And he's like, I feel like you're too young. You will change your, because of course I was young. I was 24 then, I'm 25 now. You will change your mind, and just give yourself another year, we'll talk about it. This year again, I called him. I'm like, I have not changed my mind. I still want it done because I'm done. I'm honestly done.
Right.
Yeah, so he's like, well, the thing is, you have to get to 30. That is the edge.
Wow.
So I went on Twitter and I was tweeting about it like, oh, so you guys, it's 30 is the edge to get this done. And women were there and they're like, no, it's not 30, I'm 35. And the
Still
doctors are like, yeah,
denied.
no, yeah, it's not happening. And if for it to happen, apparently you have to have 2 kids and your husband's consent.
Interesting, because Daktari, does a man have to get spousal consent to get a vasectomy? This is interesting. And why do you feel that this happens to be the case? And you read stories not just here in Kenya, but in the West as well. Yeah. It's the same case for many women seeking this kind of procedure.
First, let's correct that. There is no need for spousal consent. That is not necessary. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that TL is one of those social services that have been medicalized, and that's where the problems come. It is not a medical procedure. Like I said, medicine is about treating and preventing disease. So it's not a medical procedure, but it is done by somebody with surgical skills. And when you come to the decisions like those, then it becomes a gray area in the medical practice. Yeah. I do not have to perform a TL, okay? And I can say I will not do the TL, and that's what her doctor should have said. I feel uncomfortable doing it, and for reasons that I do not want to explain, I will not be able to offer you the service. And there are many other places, I'm sure, that would offer it. So it is wrong to keep insisting to have it from one particular doctor. So these social services that have been medicalized include things like contraception. When you take drugs to prevent a pregnancy, it is not medical treatment. They include things like breast enlargement, breast reduction, cosmetic surgery. All those things, even when you look at the insurance industry, they are not covered because they tend to have very high rates of litigation. And TL is one of those. Okay. Okay. Now, because it is a gray, is it a doctor's opinion that matters, or is it yours? If I do it for you and you change your mind, am I liable? If you say you want a reversal and it doesn't work, you end up with an ectopic. Can you say that I didn't give you enough information at the beginning? So it is a thing that I am not tied down to do, because it is not a medical procedure. But what doctors need to do is to be honest and say, I feel uncomfortable doing it. Okay. So I have told mothers that. And for me, we ask when you're pregnant. Yeah. If you say you'd like to have a TL and for whatever reason I feel uncomfortable, then I will tell you that I'll give you a referral letter to another doctor of your choice, because it is a service that I will not render.
And Regina, did you go for a second opinion once your doctor refused to give you the procedure?
Not really.
Okay.
Yeah, I trust him that much. So when he told me next year, I was like, okay, maybe I'm really rushing, so I'll wait and see.
So will you actually go to see another physician if you realize by the time you hit 30 and he gives you the same reason?
Nah, I think I'm done.
Okay, and let me bring in the lawyer here, Tina, because you wonder, and just like Daktari said, there's a lot of litigation that comes as a result. Many doctors saying, I won't be protected if I go through this procedure and I can't explain why this individual would want to reverse this. But what is the legal side of this say?
Well, what's really required is the principle of informed consent. Under the principle of informed consent, which is really under the banner of the right to health, the obligation of the health professional is to provide the patient with as much information as is necessary on what the medical intervention or what the intervention will be, what its side effects could be, the risk of its permanency, that if you decide this is it, there's no turning back. And once the health professional has provided that information, then the agency shifts to the patient. It really is the prerogative of the woman to then determine that, having received all of this information, I want it or I don't want it. In essence, what the principle of informed consent tries to prevent is subjective imposition of health professionals' biases either based on socialization or moral beliefs, and hence what Dr. was saying, that in the event that you feel as a health practitioner you cannot provide it, you have an obligation to then refer that patient to another health professional. You do not stop at, no, I can't do it.
So, but you can't force a physician to do it, though, if they...
No.
Okay.
However, so it's a two-edged sword. The health professional has to refer you to another health facility or health provider.
Not necessarily.
So what would happen
if it's a conscientious objection?
It's not conscientious. You see, when you say conscientious, you're saying religious?
Yes.
Because again there is that confusion about whether it is moral or not, because morality is really about the right or wrong of a decision, and therefore morality is not a religious belief. Even the atheists are moral. There are certain things they will not do. Right. So the idea is it right, is it wrong? I have a young lady I looked after. She came to my clinic with a husband, and they were getting married, and they wanted to have contraceptives and things because they didn't want children. And since I don't give contraceptives, they went and got them elsewhere. But when she came back to my office 10 years later, she really wanted a baby, and the husband had still not agreed. So they went pull back, and after 11 years they actually got a baby. He agreed. So they changed their mind. So when you're dealing with a couple, it's very easy for one person to make their mind very firmly and then change their mind 5 years down the line. That's why the spousal thing is brought in. It's not a requirement, but it helps for harmony for the home. Right. Then when she got this baby and gave birth, the next year she came back and she said the husband now wants another baby. So it is true that people change their minds. We are not fixed. And I've seen women coming back at 43 to say they want one more child, because the reason they don't want babies would be financial, would be what, you know, there could be so many things. So even as they're being cancelled, I think we need to be very careful about permanent things. But
doesn't it give the impression that women do not know what they want as much as Regina said, I'm sure that this is what I'd want, and so we're kind of taking that agency away from them.
I didn't say that the women have no right to ask for it. What I said is that it is true the regret rate is higher, especially if you have less than 2 children. So it's not a requirement. Is that studies have shown that if you have less or you don't have a child, regret rates are higher. The women have a right to go and make that decision. The doctors have a right to decide to give or not.
So Regina, how do you feel about the whole situation, just generally? And you're not the only one, because when you shared your story on Twitter, several women also shared it as well.
You know, the good thing about making up your mind is that it is just fed. The whole thing about studies show, they'll keep showing. There are people who still don't want kids. I have friends who are younger than me, they don't want kids. I have the ones who are older and they also don't want kids. So, and there have been cases of contraceptives failing also, so much. So I just feel like if someone wants it, if it's a referral, then that's what we are going for.
So how would a doctor then protect themselves if someone does change their mind later on?
The informed consent does also require patients to sign, you know, that I actually have consented to being provided this service. I have been explained to everything that it entails, and I willingly take the service. So whatever the consequence, then the patient has to bear it, because they have been fully informed of what the service requires and what the consequences of that service will take. But what we are seeing here is a situation where the health professional feels that they are better placed. However, what Dr. Ngari was saying earlier, in the event that there's a medical risk, they could refuse to offer it under the objection that they have explained a medical risk to the patient, but the patient has decided to proceed. However, under any other circumstance, you simply, the law does not permit you to simply say no and fold your arms. You really must be able to refer. And for sure, the agency of women is paramount. And that's what informed consent seeks to address.
All right, and I have the last word from Evelyn, just to respond to the issue of The side effects of abortion. Many of the women that you do deal with have been through crisis pregnancies and abortion, and they also get the psychosocial support from the Center of Reproductive Rights. What is the general condition you find them in, especially psychologically, after having gone through an experience like abortion?
I think it's not true to say that every woman who has had an abortion is psychologically affected. There are a number of women who I have interacted with who have no regret whatsoever and who genuinely feel that that was the right decision for them. The Center for Reproductive Rights, like many other organizations, work with women who have had abortions, unsafe abortions particularly. And I think it's important for us to say that for the organizations that work on abortion, and because I heard Anne speak about an abortion agenda, none of us will come here next year and rejoice because at the moment, the government statistics show that there are about there were about 500,000 abortions in 2012. If we come here next year and we find that there are 700,000 abortions, we will not celebrate. But we will celebrate if the number of women dying from unsafe abortion goes down. If the number of women who are living with lifelong disabilities goes down. Our aim is to ensure that no woman dies from preventable situations that we know how to deal with. Right. And in fact, it's unfortunate that we know things that we can do to prevent these deaths, but we are not taking taking action enough to ensure that we reduce those numbers.
All right, so I think we're getting a concerted nodding of heads there on that point. Thank you so much to all of my panelists. Unfortunately, time is not on our side, but of course, the conversation that we need to continue having in our various spaces and spheres of influence, it should not just stop here. Have a wonderful evening, and let's do this again next week. I'll see you again tomorrow night on Sunday Live.